The F-5E is an American Tier-6 fighter located in the F-16 branch of the Army line. Let's start the review by taking a look at its performance. You have a pretty low top speed of 1740 km per hour, which is something that's not really that important for Tier 6. The stall speed is also pretty low, but this time this is a good thing because you stall later than most other planes in dogfights. This can give you a massive advantage and potentially make you win. This plane was nerfed a lot in the past. This is most noticeable in its energy retention, which makes maintaining your optimal impossible without sacrificing some altitude. The somewhat low thrust-to-weight ratio also doesn't help with that. Thanks to it you regain your energy slower than some other planes in this tier. At least the turn rate is very good, allowing you to beat almost anything in a one-circle turn. The roll rate is also very good, being one of the highest in the game. The offensive armament consists of two 20mm M39 cannons, with 560 rounds when maxed. This is a very good amount which helps out players with poor aim. The guns deal a decent amount of damage but don't expect them to one-shot anything. Sometimes you'll need to do multiple passes before you deal enough damage to get the kill. To maximize the amount of damage you deal, you'll want to equip the air targets belt. Before I cover the missiles, I'll mention the countermeasures. You get a total of 45, 15 flares and 30 chaff. This is not a large amount, so you'll want to conserve it by only flaring if you see an IR missile coming towards you and by cutting your afterburner. This plane's stock missile is the AIM-9B, an infrared rear aspect-only heat-seeking missile. This means it can only lock targets if you're behind them, where the heat signature is the strongest. If you've ever played Tier 5 you're already familiar with it. It has a short range of around 2 km, a low max G-pull and no flare resistance whatsoever. It has a large field of view and no gimbal, limiting what the missile can see, and it lacks the ability to perform radar-assisted launches. The only good thing about it is that it's somewhat light, so it won't affect your performance too much. So, when should you fire this missile? Well, you should only fire it if you're closer than 2 km from the enemy, if the enemy is not maneuvering and is unaware of your presence. As soon as one of those criteria are not met, you should not be firing it. The AIM-9E is an infrared rear aspect-only heat-seeking missile. Basically, it's just a glorified AIM-9B. Its stats are very similar but there are some noticeable upgrades, like the slightly higher max G-pull, a much smaller field of view and the presence of a gimbal, which increases its launch capabilities. You're not limited to a small circle anymore, but rather to a much wider circle that covers half of your screen. It still lacks the ability to perform radar-assisted launches, which only tell the missile where to search for a target, just like the AIM-9B. It's a light missile that doesn't affect your performance too much. It also has a bit more range. However, I wouldn't recommend that you fire it from farther than 2.5 km. The launch criteria are the same as with the AIM-9B. The target must be unaware and he must not be maneuvering. Overall, a slightly better missile, but you should consider getting a better one. The first somewhat potent missile is the AIM-9J, an infrared rear aspect-only heat-seeking missile. While only being able to lock targets from behind, the doubled max G-pull makes this missile very hard to dodge. The improved seeker is much more flare-resistant. If the enemy flares but doesn't cut his afterburner, there's a high chance the missile will hit. The AIM-9J still lacks the ability to perform radar-assisted launches, which would be useful in situation where you can't get the seeker on your target. The range is not improved over the AIM-9E. I recommend that you fire it from a maximum distance of 2.5 km or 3 km if the enemy is slow. There aren't any recommendations as to when you should fire it. Just be somewhat aligned with the enemy and don't be too close. Overall, a pretty decent missile that I highly recommend you get. The best missile you can purchase for the F-5E is the AIM-9P5, an infrared all-aspect heat-seeking missile with IRCCM. This is basically an AIM-9J with a much better seeker. The performance is the exact same as the one of the AIM-9J, having the same range and max G-pull. Thanks to the all-aspect seeker, the launch capabilities once again increase. I recommend that you fire it in rear or side aspect shots, where it's the hardest to flare. I only recommend firing it in head-ons if the enemy is flying a plane without flares. If you've ever played against an F-5, you've probably been killed by this missile. So now I'll explain how the IRCCM works and how you can flare it. Now let's take a look at how the IRCCM works. A couple important things to note are the circles that are on your screen. The yellow one represents the missile's field of view, while the green one represents the enemy's heat signature. So currently, the missile is traveling towards the enemy normally. But then, the enemy drops a flare, and now there's another heat source in the missile's field of view. So what does the missile do? Instead of going for the flare, it locks its seeker and uses inertial guidance to go where it thinks the enemy will fly. Once there are no more flares in the missile's field of view, it unlocks its seeker and relocks the enemy. And if the enemy doesn't flare again, he'll end up in this situation. Here's a quick guide on flaring an AIM-9P5. You can pause the video to read the full text. When it comes to the recommended loadouts, there's not much I can say other than equip 2 of your best IR missiles. The radar this plane gets is the AN/APQ-159. Our radar on this plane isn't that important. The only time you'll use it is when you're radar slaving your AIM-9P5. Still, I'll give you a quick overview of it. The type of radar is pure, which like most other radars in this tier gets affected by chaff and ground clutter. The range is pretty low, but it's good enough for your AIM-9P. The search cone is not the biggest and you only get access to one lock type, STT or hard lock. Obviously not the best radar, but you can't equip any radar missiles, so it doesn't really matter that much. This plane gets one of the best RWRs of this tier, the AN/ALR-69. Here's a quick guide on it. A thing to keep in mind is that there's no notching required in tier 6. However, a recent update made it much harder to chaff radars in head-ons, so you'll want to avoid them with radar missile carrying planes of this tier. Last but not least is the playstyle. On your screen should be the most important things to keep in mind while playing the F-5. You can once again pause the video to read the full text. Last thing I have to do is place the F-5E on this tier list. After gathering the thoughts of my community and combining them with my own, I've decided to put it into the S- tier. I created this tier because in my previous tier list there were lots of planes that were too good for A tier but not good enough for S tier, and the F-5 is one of them. It has very good missiles, one of the best RWRs and decent performance. It only lacks in the missile count and energy retention. So, what do you guys think of the F-5? Comment down below. Also don't forget to join my Discord server where you can vote on many different things, post video ideas, chat with other viewers and much more. With that said, I thank you for watching and I'll see you soon.